Should I write a story in first person? Should I write a story in second person? Should maybe I use third person? Is there a fourth person? There's so many point of views to tell stories from. Let's talk about it. I'm James Winterthorn. This is Writer's Theory, and let's get to it. One of the first things we learn when we're writing stories is what is the point of view? This is who is or what perspective is a story being told from? And oftentimes we have to learn this up front because it dictates how the story is told, what pronouns we use, and just so we understand characters and setting, the point of view is critical to understanding how the story goes. And without knowing what we want it to be, we can't really write effectively or communicate the story that we want to tell. So, just what is point of view? Well, point of view is who is telling the story, from what perspective the story is being told, and how much this narrator knows about the events in the world and just what has taken place inside of it. And when we look at point of view, there are generally three ways that we look at it. The first being first person point of view. This is where we're using pronouns like I, me, and my. There's second person point of view. This is where we're using the pronoun you, less commonly used for sure. And then, of course, there is the third person point of view where we're using they and them and their. And even within third person, there are variations. And this usually comes down to understanding from the narrator's point of view of the events known. We'll get into each one, and I'll share my thoughts about using each one and what approach you can take and why you might make certain decisions when it comes to selecting a specific point of view. First person point of view is where we are seeing the story being told from a specific character's point of view. Like we can hear their thoughts. They're sharing their story with us, where it almost feels like a journal or a diary of events from a character's perspective. So it's easy to I do this often, and I think this is just natural, where we see the I and me and my, and we conflate that with the author, and it's very easy to think that that is the author's perspective because it just feels so personal. And that's what first person point of view really gives us, is it feels very intimate with that character, like we are seeing the world through their eyes. And so it's very good for that. It's very good for getting to know a character and character development, at least for the one particular character. But of course, it's also limiting because we only see the world through that character's eyes rather than anybody else that might be in that story, at least for those portions where first person is being used. First person is engaging. It tends to be more exciting. Again, it's just limiting in terms of understanding other characters. But in terms of understanding one character, the first person point of view is a fantastic tool. The second person point of view is where you're using you as the principal pronoun. And this is used less commonly. So it feels more like a directive, or where you're really having to put yourself as a reader into the story that's being told, and almost like a dream state where these events are unfolding and you're the one doing it. It's very unique. There's not a lot of stories that are told this way, but it's a fun exercise too. So if you really want to experiment with point of view exercises, try writing something in second person and see how that feels. It's a good exercise to do, but most fiction just isn't told this way. I think because it's not as engaging, and when you tell somebody something about what they're doing, they're just not as bought in. You're like, well, I wouldn't open that door, or I wouldn't run upstairs when there's a murderer, coming in the house, whatever that thing is. Second person just isn't necessarily a great effective. Second person point of view just isn't as effective a storytelling device as first or third. Third person point of view can be a little more dynamic. And this is where we step back from any given character and we have a narrator sharing the events. Oftentimes, we tend to break up third person point of view into two categories, and that would be a limited third person point of view or an omniscient third person point of view. The limited being that information that's in the world isn't necessarily shared or known. And so there's a little more mystery. It's a little more removed from what's happening. And we get to observe more and then make our own judgments with a limited third person point of view. And with an omniscient third person point of view, we see that the narrator just tends to know more, if not everything. And so it's okay when information is shared from the narrator that isn't known to the characters. And that's generally the defining line. What's known to the characters in the story can be shared in a limited point of view versus any bit of knowledge being shared in an omniscient third-person point of view. I think what we generally see more of is the limited, because we still want some intrigue. We still want some discovery in what we're reading. And the limited third-person point of view tends to be more effective at doing that. You can also pare down how much information is being shared in that limited, where it's very observational, where we're not hearing anything about what the characters feel or their sensory experiences, and we just see it as like maybe we were watching a movie and you had to describe the entire scene, but we can't know what a character might be feeling, and instead we have to observe their behaviors and describe what they're doing very clearly. This is a little more challenging to do. It's also not as engaging a reading experience. But when done well, it makes you think more about the content that you're reading. Those are generally the points of view that you would take while approaching fiction. So first person, second person, third person, and then within third person, you have limited and you have omniscient. And those are generally the points of view that you want to approach fiction writing with. And if you're new to fiction writing, I would just keep, I wouldn't play around too much outside of that. You're going to learn everything you need to know within that framework. So as a writer, you're approaching a story and you're like, well, which one of these should I use? And what are some examples of them? Again, if the first person, using first person point of view, it's more intimate with that character, and as a result, it tends to be easier to write. So if you are new to fiction writing, I would suggest writing in the first person, at least initially, because it gets you more in the habit of storytelling. You can interject your own thoughts into your character just to get the habit down of writing. The character will feel a little more like you initially, but eventually you'll start to see that character develop their own traits and become their own individual. First person just tends to be a little easier to write. At least that has been my experience. So I would recommend that for if you're just starting fiction writing and you're not really sure where to start. I would just start first person. It's again easier, and it'll allow you to branch out more once you get your habits down and when you understand better what you want to accomplish. I think the best example I can think of off the top of my head for first person would be the Hunger Games. Those books were told in a first person point of view. Excellent example of that. Second person, I would generally not recommend writing something in unless you are just experimenting. You just want to play around with writing and you want to write a directive style of prose. But generally, readers don't appreciate the second person point of view. It's weird to write in as well. I would recommend doing it just to experiment, just to play around. And maybe you want to write a novel in second person. I don't know. Not a lot of people are doing it. It would certainly be unique. The best example I can think of for second person point of view. I don't know if you ever read the Choose Your Own Adventure stories, but those are told in second person, and it is again where it's telling you what your experience is as you go through. You get to a certain point of the story, and then you make a decision, and then based on that decision, you go to a given page, and then you go to that page, and it tells you what happened based off your decision. It was a fun and interesting those books were fun. And if you had the pleasure of reading them, you certainly remember and enjoyed those. But those are a good example of second person point of view. Third person is generally what we see in most fiction writing because it allows for more scope. So I can tell a story from more characters' perspective without it being really confusing. So let's say I had 3 characters and I had them all be in first person, that would get very confusing, especially as they interacted with each other. I'd have to be very clear on the writing about who was speaking, and you had to put a lot of effort into making sure your reader understands who the current point of view is coming from. So third person solves this very easily, just because we're going to use names more in the prose as pronouns. So instead of I, you get to use he, but you're also going to use that character's name more, and it's very clear, or it's clearer, who the current point of view character is, or all the characters and how they're interacting. So third person is more flexible and allows you to more cleanly tell the story with different characters without favoring one over another and sharing your story that way. So when I approached writing my novel, Chords of Fate, not the Western that I'm writing here, I started in first person. And this is, you see this every once in a while in stories, and it wasn't really my intention when I started, but I started in first person, and I really needed to tell the story from other characters' perspective, and I kept the first person for the main character, and then I used third person when I needed to have other characters' perspectives. And so I kept a third person limited when I wasn't with my main character, and I made sure that it was still from another character's perspective, but I kept it in third person for those other characters. So I had a very clear and defined main character because those portions were kept in first person, and any other perspective was in third. I did my best to stylize that third person prose so it felt different when Liam is talking, when it's Liam's perspective, or when it was Ren's perspective, um, and tried to keep the style unique so you could still tell who the point of view character was, but those characters that weren't Tink were in third person versus first person. Wasn't my intention initially to tell the story that way. Um, and for a while, I considered adjusting it to all third person. But I ultimately liked the way that it felt, having that change. Um, and it ultimately, when I wrote that story, it kind of became its own thing. And on some level, I felt wrong. It felt wrong to change it structurally like that, because it kind of felt like its own living thing, and I shouldn't make certain changes to it. So in my book, in my first book, I opted to use first person and third person, which is a little unusual, but I'm obviously okay with that. Um, I'm curious what you prefer to do when you're writing. Do you like first person? Do you prefer to write in third person? Have you written stories in second person? I'm very curious what your experiences have been. Please leave me a comment below just so I can know what your experiences are. If you enjoyed this video and you want to watch more videos about writing advice, if you want to watch my journey of writing a novel, please like and subscribe, ring the bell, or click the bell, and you'll be notified when videos come out. And let me know what other writing related content you're curious about. I love to be a resource for writers, especially new writers. So let me know if there's something you're curious about, if there are aspects to your writing that you struggle with that you would like some advice on. I'm glad to make videos in that regard. So thank you for watching this video. I hope you found some value and learned a little bit about point of view. And I will see you in the next one. So we'll get into each one, and I'll discuss my thoughts. Nope, stop saying discuss. Discuss.